This episode of the Canon Puncture Show is sponsored by Drive-Thru RPG. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Canon Puncture Show. This is your host, Rich Rogers, and this is another one of our Game Advocates episodes. I've brought on the world's biggest fanboy of a game called Polaris, the author of Dirty Secrets and Flower for Mara, Seth Ben-Ezra. Hey, welcome to the show, Seth.
Thanks, Rich. Glad to be here.
Let's just jump right into this fanboy thing of yours, Polaris. What's this game? Tell me about it.
Polaris is, as it says, see here on the back, chivalric tragedy at the utmost north. In the long distant past, there was the people who lived at the North Pole. This is epic, tragic story of how it was always night and always ice, and then the king and the queen consorted with demons. There was a big falling out, the sun rose, and the city was destroyed. And now all that's left of the great city of Polaris is 4 remnants and this giant smoking crater of mistake, from which the demons crawl out and assault the remnants of the people. And you play the Knights of the Order of the Stars, sworn to defend the remnants, to fight the demons, and to fight them back into their hole. Of course, it's a tragedy, which means the arc of your character is sketched out for you. Either, by the end of the story, your knight will die, or will have gone to the other side and become a demon himself, which sounds bleak, but is not necessarily as bleak as it might be, and I'll touch on that later. But that's the general arc. So I was very much kind of touched on Amber in my role-playing history. Really, really loved Nobilis when that was around. And so the epic high fantasy-ness of it all, giant soaring ice castles and demonic armies as far as the eye can see, and flames and lightning and elvish, like wuxia swordsmanship with swordsmen out of starlight, and that kind of thing really, really works for me. And so when I heard about this game and was really getting connected with it, just completely fell in love.
So are there any aspects about Polaris that make it stand out or make it different from a kind of a quote-unquote normal role-playing game?
It is definitely one of the more innovative role-playing systems. The book says it's for 3 to 5, but really it's best with 4. And it is a GM-less game. Might have been the first GM-less game I played. Everybody has their own knight, and on a given person's turn, one person's playing his knight, and then everybody else plays different aspects of opposition. You have the person sitting across the table who plays the mistaken. So all the demons and all the forces of opposition are played by him. And the 2 people on the left and the right play other characters, either characters in society or characters who have a personal relationship with the knight. And then that relationship shifts. So it's like, it's my turn, and you're sitting across the table from me. You're the mistaken. You're playing all of my adversaries, and the other 2 are playing the other characters. Then it rotates. Now you and I are playing the different sort of secondary characters to the person sitting on my left, and on around the table. That's one of the things just in terms of the structure of the game. The other is that it is a mostly diceless system. The conflicts all are negotiated through a series of ritual phrases. And so I'm maybe my knight, and I say, okay, so Nair charges out of the gate, draws his sword, and lops off the head of the lead general of the demon army, and they turn and flee. You might say, but only if, is that the ritual phrase, but only if the acid blood from the demon splashes on you and you're injured. And then I could say, ooh, acid blood, that's kind of cool, okay. And that was how it happened. Or I might say, but only if the scars add an impressive air to my demeanor. Things like that. And you kind of you negotiate back and forth with those and other phrases until you either come to a point of having negotiated out, or someone puts his foot down and says, it shall not come to pass, in which case you bust out a die and you roll it. So a lot of the ritualness of it all, both in the conflict and then even just in the structure of the game. There's a ritual opening of the game. Beginning of the game, ideally, you're supposed to have a candle. The book says it's optional, but way back when I told Ben it shouldn't be. In my opinion, the candle's not optional. So you have a candle in the middle of the table, one person lights it and says, long ago, the people were dying at the end of the world. The first time your character enters the scene in a given game session, you say, hope was not yet lost for so-and-so, still heard the song of the stars. And then when you wrap it up, you say, that was all long ago, now there are none to remember it, you blow out the candle. So the ritual structuring of the game adds a certain gravitas. That's a nice big word. It puts you in the right mood of an epic tale. And also I found it's an incredible focuser because I find for gaming, be it board gaming or role-playing, there's that moment of, come on, people, we're supposed to get started now thing. And sometimes it can be hard to gather people's attention. When you stop, you say the ritual phrase, you light the candle, suddenly it's like everybody's in the zone. And, well, now we're doing this thing. And then you blow out the candle, you say the phrase, well, then we're done. That was actually one of the lessons I've learned, and it's been ported into other games. When we played PTA, we had our theme music we started with, Far From Mara, I have opening and closing. I learned all that from Polaris. On top of that, it's also just sort of, the power level can be kind of high, so you can sort of have that, at least when I play, you end up with sort of that wire work sort of thing, sort of Legolas, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon sort of thing. So these, insane epic, we're on our ice striders and jump off and do a somersault midair and land and hack into the demon, which is not strictly speaking in the game, but in my head, that's how it works. And the system will absorb it because if mistaken thinks it's cool, then it goes, and if not, there are ways of making that not matter. But the knights are always just at least again in my games, completely awesome characters. Of course, that makes their tragic downfall all the more tragic.
You get this setting, this kind of wuxia feels, these larger-than-life elves and knights. I got to be honest, why wouldn't I just take those ideas and use it to play a game of Exalted?
Well, at the beginning, I have to confess that I'm only a little familiar with Exalted. So I'm sort of working off of things I sort of read around the internet and my general familiarity with Storyteller from playing Mage and whatnot back in the day. And I know it's not the same. Two big differences, I think I would say. The first is the inherent tragic arc. In Polaris, one of the mechanics is experience, which this is a particularly bleak take on experience. You start off as a novice, and you have a zeal score. Your zeal starts at 4. Under certain circumstances, you get experience, and you make an experience check, which might cost you a point of zeal. Experience is whenever you show apathy or disdain for the people, for the people you're supposed to be protecting, sympathy for the demons, for the enemy, or generally act with callousness or cruelty, there's a couple of things, then that's experience. And every time you lose a point of zeal, well, you bump one of your stats. You have 2 stats, Ice and Light, and that's the general progression. When you run out of zeal, there's this moment where you move from zeal 1 to weariness 1. And the next scene you have, you meet the Frost Maiden or the Solaris Knight. That meeting is when you discover it's your doom to betray the people. And those are always pretty potent moments. And that's when you really play up the art filmness of it all. Again, at least at my table, right? We had one where the knight was walking down the street and the Solaris Knight walked the other way. The symbol of all that the knights stand against. That he draws his sword and salutes him as he passes. That sort of thing is a big, momentous occasion. Well, now you're out of zeal. You have weariness, a point of weariness. And now you're a veteran. Until that point, you cannot die. But now, as you gain more experience, your weariness goes up. As you've run out of zeal for the fight, you're just tired. And you're tired, and you're tired until you get to 4 weariness, which is when you become a demon. That's one of the 2 outcomes. And the only way to avoid that is to work to die in some way that makes you happy before you get there. So the tragic arc is built into Polaris. If that's not your thing, then you're probably going to want to go play Exalted. But that's key to it, and as far as I know, Exalted doesn't mechanically support that. I'm sure you could play a tragedy. But the focus is on the wire work and the wuxia and things like that, which is all cool. I mean, you heard me geeking out about that a moment ago. But the mechanics of Polaris focusing on tragedy. And then, conflict-wise, I mean, Exalted is, I'm guessing, skills, stats, and I had this power and that power, and I can chain them together and do uber moves and things like that, and that's the focus of the game. I once heard Ben Lehman, the designer of the game, say that at the core of what he wanted out of this game was the knight cutting a deal with the demon. So the negotiating is negotiating with the darkness. So every time then we come into conflict, and I'm like, I want to do something awesome. And the Mistaken's like, yeah, but here's the cost. It's going to cost you this. And I'm like, well, but in that case, I also want this, or, but that's too much, or it focuses on cost, and so you constantly have the Mistaken on the other side, taking all of your efforts to be cool and awesome and win, and trying to bend them and twist them against you and turn them against you in different ways. And again, that sort of dynamic isn't present in Exalted. You have the PCs and you have the GM who's throwing opposition, but that sense of my best efforts are being turned against me is probably lacking. And sometimes I would hope so. Again, I mean, the focus of Polaris is tragedy. I wouldn't want someone to get into it for all the wire work and stuff. If you want the wire work, then probably Exalted is the better bet. But if you the whole idea of this high-flying tragedy, the emotional arc, is sort of the difference between, say, Big Trouble in Little China and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. There's over-the-top kung fu in both of them, but Crouching Tiger has that extra artistic thing that makes it different. Polaris definitely is more in that second category.
Reflecting back on the games of Polaris that you've played, how does the game, what are people doing at the table? What's the subject of the game when it actually hits the table and people are negotiating and rolling dice?
When you sit down to do character creation, one of the things in your character sheet is called the cosmos, which is, it's all the nouns in your character's life. People, important places, important things. And conceptually then, your knight is in the center of this, and hey, here's the characters that belong to society under the control of the full moon. It's one of the players, the full moon. And then the new moon, those are all like the personal people. So like, my betrothed, that might be new moon. That would be kind of interesting. You put that in the full moon. I'm betrothed because I have an obligation versus I'm betrothed because of love. And so you have all these, and then of course the Mistaken. So these are demons and people who just have it in for me. Generally at the beginning, there's a sense, based on what's on the character sheet, of, well, my character is sort of in this spot. And I have found that early in the game of Polaris, there's a sense of here's all this stuff, and now you have to kind of get things moving. And generally, we all have our different strategies for this. Ben Lehman's strategy is he kills the Senate and just sets up martial law. I generally find that possessing someone with a demon is a good something to kind of get things moving. And then the knight reacts to that, and then you're off. Some things, how they have played out. Your knights, so I mean, there's fighting, there's patrols. In the winter, there's parties. So you have all sort of the standard courtly intrigues and military campaigns. And generally, if you just kick off with one of those things and just get into it, and everybody else is committed to using what's on your character sheet, these are characters, places, things, that you end up starting to build off of those. So, okay, I'm out on patrol. All right, that's good. And, like one of my characters, I wanted to play someone different than me for a change. So I played basically Tom Cruise as an elf, right? In Top Gun. So it was me and then my wingman, and we both were riding ice dragons. And, the book doesn't say anything about ice dragons, but in this run there were ice dragons because ice dragons are awesome. And so we were out on patrol, and there was these ruins out there. That was on my sheet. They had a name, I don't remember what it was now. And then we land there, and then Ralph, who was playing Mistaken, ends up bringing in, okay, and there's blades of grass there. And then there's this child. And so we find this child who became the big MacGuffin for that run of Polaris, the Spring Child, who's bringing spring back into the world. And remember, we live at the North Pole, and winter and dark is the good thing. The sun was the enemy. And the coming of spring, what does that mean for us? And so, those sort of things. And then, this person wants the Spring Child, and this person wants to kill the Spring Child, and demonic invading forces, and what did I do along the way? So here come the demonic forces, and I charge my ice dragon, and I'm attacking them, and I want to be like really awesome and strafe them and blow ice bolts at them. Mistaken's like, yes, but only if you miss the demons that cross the wall and they kill your betrothed. Like, no, curse you. Yeah, that kind of thing. The game relies fairly heavily on the Mistaken probing for those weak points and then jabbing at it. One of the things I found kind of fun, and this admittedly is probably because I'm sadistic, when it's my turn to play my character on the heart, then the person sitting across the table from me is the Mistaken, the person who's responsible to bring the adversary, bring the pain. But then flip it around, when that person's playing is the heart, when that person's playing his knight, I get to bring the pain. So there ends up being almost this little rivalry that starts going. It's like, okay, now it's my turn to be Mistaken. You know that thing you did to my knight that last turn? Yeah, now you're going to eat it, punk. And you have to be careful. There's this necessity to juggle between it's my job to hurt you and like it, and what I've called an aesthetic sensibility. I mean, the rules will just let you keep on running, and at some point you have to know to say, you know what? Properly speaking, I shouldn't let you do that, but that's so awesome that I'm going to. Or I'm going to try to bend it this way instead of that way because that's cool. And the point here is that through this tussle, that an enjoyable story emerges. Not just that I completely broke your character and there's this kind of slot. Respecting the emerging story is important. But then keeping that tension, then there's this ongoing struggle of each of the protagonists to try to achieve something, and again it gets bent back, or I achieved it but it cost me this, which then comes back to haunt me in this way, which then I try to overcome that, which tries to haunt me in this way, and then there's always that experience wearing away at you, ticking, until you cross over from being a novice full of zeal into a veteran who's seen too much, and then is when you start trying to figure out how you're going to go out. How is the story going to end?
We average 9 new titles a day. That's over 60 a week. And we've got well over 15,000 RPG titles online right now. Drive-Thru RPG, the one true source for RPGs.
Kind of touched on this a little bit in just now, but what would you warn a new player of Polaris about?
One of the things I would say is, like I said, getting started can be a little slow. I find that to be the case with most GM-less games, so it's nothing new. And so sometimes you just, at the beginning of Polaris, you just have to spike things, have something big to kind of give things a shove. I find that once you do that, people are busy running around picking up the pieces, and things, then suddenly the ideas start to flow. So being willing just to start things off with a bang of some kind is helpful. Another thing, which is actually written in the book because it's so important, people are used in role-playing games, they're used to making statements that are statements of intent. I draw my sword and I try to chop his head off. Well, in Polaris, those sort of things fall short because what you say happens unless it gets challenged in conflict. And so, I don't want to say I try to chop his head off, I just go ahead and say, I chop his head off. Say what you want to have happen. Now, sometimes, a more advanced application, the fact that I'm trying is actually what I want. But it's good for people to get in the habit of actually going out and saying what I want. So, and I think people get hung up there because they're used to this is the point that the dice are supposed to roll, or this is when the GM's supposed to stop me and say, no, you're being insane. Go for broke. Again, that aesthetic sensibility, respect the fiction, but you're a Knight of the Order of the Stars. Of course you draw your sword and charge at the demonic enemy, right? One knight, one army, it's totally fair. And go out there and say, I hack them down, and hours of bloodshed, and I emerge victorious. And it's up to the person sitting across the table from you to bend that. Say what you want. And then the last thing? At one point, I'm not sure if it's still available on the internet, but I have a chart of the different ritual phrases that say, here's this thing that can be responded to with this, but only if it can be responded to with these things, and furthermore, can only be responded to with these. A lot of the strategy of the game is in that, but it's easy to lose track of what am I allowed to say and what am I allowed to respond with. So I find having some of those cheat sheets in front of you is helpful to get going. Once you get into it, I mean, at this point, all the phrases I've been throwing around, I'm working from memory. But at the beginning, it's like, and so it was, it things, and so having some of that just sitting right on the table in front of you can be handy. I know I said that was last, but I'm going to say one more thing. I found that when you cross the line from being novice to veteran, it's at the point that the game is signaling to you, saying, hey, things are starting into the downward slope. It's time for you to consider how you're getting off this train. According to the rules of the game, you're not allowed to die until you reach that point. And you have to get that in negotiation, and only the heart, only the player can say that. So I can say, I do this thing, and you're like, well, but only if, 3/4 of the city is destroyed. I'm like, yeah, okay, but only if I die. I'm the only one who can ask for it. I can only ask for it with a but only if. How do you want to die? Think about it, and work for it. Or, what about becoming a demon? While I've played this with people several times, I've seen it through to the end twice. It can be a longer game, unless you're playing the really, 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 really pushing on the experience hard. And so my two guys who I really, really saw through to the end of this, one of them died. He died defending the remnant. All this, charge the demonic army thing, that's what happened. He was out there, he was fighting, and he was just laying the smack down on everybody. And the mistake kept on trying to do stuff, and I would slap it down with dice rolls, and I kept on making all the dice rolls. It was really, really cool. And then he was killed by a stray arrow, and all the people blamed him because they said he brought the demon army, and so even though he saved the remnant, he was forgotten to the ages, and no one remembered his great service, which I thought was a cool ending. And if you don't think it's a cool ending, then you don't want to play this game. The other one, my guy actually became a demon. Because he's like, wow, look at what we need to do to protect Polaris, this corrupt system. No. And it was weird because in both of them, completely different endings. The dying one and then the actually becoming a demon. But in that game where he became a demon, he went to the other side, which was the right side. At least in that game, he saw himself as, I was the defender of a corrupted order, and I'm not going to do that anymore. But either way, you need to start figuring out how you're trying to get off the train. And the mistaken then needs to be thinking about how much he's going to try to make you pay to get off the train the way you want.
Cool.
And those are the sort of things as a noob to kind of be keeping in mind.
So what do you see other people when they're playing it? What do they seem to enjoy the most about Polaris?
I think a lot of people really connect with the ritual part of it. I'm trying to kind of flip through different posts. I know somebody posted on Story Games about this recently. I just kind of skimmed through it. He was kind of geeking that he got somebody who wasn't into role-playing games to play it. Oddly, at least for the right kind of person, this can actually be a great gateway game for a non-gamer. Because, yes, there's the ritual phrases and things like that, but that's it. You have those in front of someone, walk them through it, and it's natural language, it flows really well, and I think I've seen other people pick up on that. Anna Kreider actually did a setting mashup for Polaris called Thou Art But a Warrior, which was about the fall of, get this right, of Muslim Spain to the Reconquistadors. No, I'm mangling it. But she actually took it out of the fantasy setting and mapped it to there. But still, it's that same tragic arc. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to the game, is the ritual. And then the tragedy of knights who are standing tall, but in the end, they still go down. I think those are the things, is again, that ritual and then the tragedy.
Why do people hate Polaris? What do they hate about it?
Honestly, the same kind of things. I remember someone making the comment to me face to face that some of the setting he thought was kind of twee. Ice knights and starlight swords, and this almost over the top poetic. I mean, it's sort of the opposite of over the top macho, I guess. Just over the top poetic, and that just doesn't work for some people. The ritual phrases and opening and closing. Some people are like, think that's kind of silly. Some people just don't get into GM-less games. There's always that. Some people have complained the learning curve is too high. I think that can be fixed with, again, with a handout, but it is something that's been brought up. I really think that it's the same thing. It's just like, either you're going to connect with this thing because of the color of it. It's like Ice Knights. Wow, yeah. Demons crawling out of the pit, and smoke, and blood and fire. I mean, if those things are kind of like, oh, yeah. For some people, they're like, oh, come on. Really? That's just sort of, wirework stuff? And do you have to say this thing before every game? Really? And a candle? Lame. And so I think it's those same elements. And I want to have a happy ending. Those are the same sort of things that are the turn on for me are the exact same points that I think people tend to push back at. So, and I think it boils down to just different people get in the game for different reasons and have different tastes. That's all cool.
Anything else about Polaris that we haven't covered you want to highlight?
As I say, I have not heard about this game getting a lot of love recently, and I really think it's worth it. It was one of the shining gems to come out of early Game Chef. It's definitely one of the classics of the indie movement. If you haven't played it, it's worth the time. It's worth the time just to experience the sort of fiction it produces and to experience some of the force of ritual, which I think some of those things can be ported over to other games. Maybe not quite with the same uber poetry of it, but as I say, we play PTA, pick a theme music, play it. I learned those sort of things from Polaris.
Seth, thanks so much for coming on and advocating for Polaris. Really appreciate your time.
I appreciate the opportunity.
We had such potential, such promise.